Shh, come here. Honey, come here. Come here, baby.
Who's active research?
Hello, hello. I'm here today with Dom Tremblay, my brother from another mother, good friend I've made over the last year and a half. So glad to have Dom with me here today. The End Evil podcast is dedicated to truth, freedom, care, and freedom is the most important thing we all need to be thinking about. And that's why I got Dom here today to help me talk about the importance of freedom, but we're going to do that in sort of an abstract way by going back deep into the history of humans in the very, very beginning, how it all began and why that's important. What's up, Dom? How you doing?
Hey, how are you, brother? I'm doing great. I'm glad we're gonna have this discussion. I think it's been like over a year since we've released something together, actually. So I'm stoked for this chat, brother.
Yeah, it's been too long since we've got a good opportunity to hang out on interview style. Well, so you got your Natural Freedom League on sweater on there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, man, represent. Put something
Yeah,
good in the hair, put something good in the heart.
something good in the
Put
ground.
put.
Right on. Well, I remember when you did your interview with Mark Passio, then you started bringing up, um, like interference theory or ancient alien theory, whatever you want to call it. People have different terms they toss around, but that intrigued me because that was like real early in my journey towards realizing all the world of things I've come to realize about the world. That was like one of the first things on the path that sparked my curiosity was like, how come there's still so many unanswered questions in the world? And so when you brought up that theory, I was like, oh, that's important. I want to connect with Dom on that because I think that might be a way for us to reach out to other people that have some of those same questions. How did you first come across the interference theory, ancient alien theory, whatever you want? What do you call it, Dom?
Well, like everyone, I listened to the History Channel first, but I've always been like puzzled by the pyramids, like everyone. And but when I stumbled across Mark's work and I found his cosmic abandonment, presentation, it really like put all the things, pieces of the puzzle, together. He made this nice synthesis of, a lot of work of all these researchers like Zachariah Sitchin that we're going to talk about, and Travis Walton. It takes courage, I think, to talk about these UFOs, things like pseudoscience, human origins, because there's a lot of debunkers and there's a lot of fears, and people don't want to assume their responsibility linked to finding all these great mysteries and digging. So Stoke, we're gonna talk about it, and no problem. No, no, I'm fearless. Bring them on.
Well, the only thing that worries me is the names of these different places and um, subject matter. Some of the names and titles, I'm not the best at pronouncing them or knowing how to say them. But what I can do is share with people the things that I've discovered and find really interesting, and then maybe that can be sort of a jumping off point for other people's their own research. But I think when we ask the question like, where do we really come from, and then more importantly, why are we a species that seems to be falling for this trap of slavery, of letting ourselves be owned by other people? And all through history it's been going on. For so many years it was kings subjugating people and their serfs, and there was these different levels and layers of society. But it looks like it's been going on as far back in history as we look. And then to me, when I started looking at Zachariah Sitchin's work, it started putting together some of those pieces that didn't make sense to me. And I also want to mention Lloyd Pye because I didn't really bring any of his information today to share, but he was another one that really kind of opened the door to looking at this whole history, this whole story that we've been told, and breaking it apart and kind of reframing a new story that I'm not going to say I believe in any one part of it as a whole, but it gives a lot of background to all the other stuff I studied. And I brought that up when I was talking about the Bible because I looked at the Bible a lot when I was a kid. I went to church a lot. So I don't know, what was
That's
your
right.
experiences when you were a young person, Dom? Were you part of a religious group, or how'd you get into
Uh,
that
my
stuff?
parents weren't that much religious. Here in Quebec, religion is not really. It's pretty much dead since the '60s, I would say, here, but way less than in the U.S. But of course, most people, when you talk about the human origins and they start going to this rabbit hole, uh, they stop at the book of Genesis in the Bible, Adam and Eve, and then they start to look for bones of Adams, start to dig, find the bones of Adams without knowing that maybe there are stories, and there are like the cuneiform tablets and the Sumerian cylinders that we're going to talk about, that predates by thousands of years the Bible. So, and also can also helps us make sense of some of the things in the Bible, like the stories of Abraham, that's the foundation of the Christianity, Islam, and then also the Jewish people in the Torah. So there's a lot to talk about, and but one thing that I notice is that most people stop at the story of the Bible, the creation story, and maybe there's more to it. Maybe there's something behind it, and maybe this story is not really um, what we think it is. And that's one of the things also I thought in my presentation is that be careful, when you read the Bible, when you read these stories, the various interpretations and what people want you to believe. So it's very important to look at these stories, even the stories that we're going to talk today, with criticism, and it's perfectly fine. We're not going to say that these are the perfect truth. It's maybe it resonate with truth with us, but it's just something that we want to, I guess, bring people to look at and search
Yeah,
more.
and in a way, you get further by what we can call bullshit on, basically, to put it in real plain English. It's like you could wonder all day about what is true and what actually did happen, but what we can do a lot of times easier is figure out what didn't happen and what's not true. It's like um, September 11th is a good example of that. It was very clear to me right away that what didn't happen was what they were saying. The story they were describing, that story made no sense because of the artifact, the actual evidence I was seeing of what actually happened. And so I think it's the same with this stuff. When you look at these actual pieces of evidence, the artifacts, like the most giant pieces of stone in the world, it's like pretty hard to just deny, these things exist whether you like it or not. And there begs a lot of questions just in that. And so I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We got some slides to share, and that'll give us a jumping off point of where we're going to start talking about this subject matter. But yeah, I think for me, what really jumped out early on was, like, I think the first book I got was Forbidden Archaeology. There was another one too, but they talk about these artifacts that people have found that don't fit in at all to the timeline that we've been heard or what we've been taught in school. And then when I thought back to, like, school, for instance, like, they don't even try to answer these riddles. Like the pyramids, is the most basic one. It's like, how could there be things like this on Earth that we still haven't figured out how anyone made? And we think of ourselves as being so technologically superior to past people, but yet way back in antiquity, people were able to make things like what you see in these pictures, that are incredible, mind-blowing things that we don't even really know how to make. And so, that to me asks a lot of questions, and I'm always encouraging people to ask questions. So this is a good topic to start asking questions. So what are the questions you think are important for people to be asking and thinking, Don?
Well, the first question is, am in a proper mindset, to learn or to study these things? And that was one of my, first slides. And I think that during my presentation at the follow conference, and I think that I'm gonna hammer this each and every time, and I'm still gonna hammer this. You cannot look at these things, with a left brain imbalance or a right brain imbalance, meaning that you cannot just being a rigid skeptic, or on the opposite side, just use only your emotions. Being governed only by your emotions. When you look at these things, you get a strike for a balance of emotions, intuition, and also, skepticism, but not, rigid. So because if you fall into one of these two categories, you're not gonna go far, because your ego, or whatever reason, for whatever reason, you're gonna stop your research right there, and you're not gonna be able to go deep. I've also, put a slide about, some of the debunkers. It's great to debunk stuff, but again, these debunkers sometimes they just use their you'll find in later slides that the debunkers, they use mostly their emotions. They almost like name callings and stuff, without really, you know stating facts, or like this one. Yeah, like this slides. Of course, Graham Hancock has written a lot of books. You see a few of the books he wrote about these, stories, or of ancient past. And I took this article, I think it was from July last year, from what's his science, whatever journal, trying to debunk uh, Graham Hancock. But when you read at the arguments or the counter argument they use to debunk the stories, it's just thin air, you know. So again, they debunk just for debunking. You know, because they can't actually. It's hard to explain both on, you know, if you believe in that stuff, or both if you are a non-believer. So again, you gotta be really open. You have to look at this stuff with an open mind, and if you do, maybe the whole universe, you know, will make more sense to you, and stuff that mysteries, you know, that you cannot explain, maybe will uh, piece by piece make more sense. See, the dog agrees with me.
Let's see, what does this article says? In his 2015 Magician of the Gods, Graham Hancock argues that this advanced civilization was responsible for many of the pyramid building tech seen in Egypt and most of South America. However, he also states that his advanced civilization, which was based on the continent of Antarctica, which he further argues was located far from the South Pole at the time of its height, was wiped off the face of the earth so completely that the only thing that remained was the pyramid building techniques they passed on to their supposed descendants. This theory is problematic in a lot of ways. First, anything man made, especially by a civilization as advanced as the one proposed by Graham Hancock, will leave some sort of trace, be it a tool, a shard of pottery, a scrap of clothing, or even garbage. Heck, scientists were able to find shop receipts and complaint letters against certain merchants in ancient Mesopotamian sites.
See,
The
you can
idea,
just you can just stop right there. But you see, this is a really allegedly science journal article, and you see that what they are using to debunk is that they would have left some tools behind. You know, how stupid is that? You know, if they use like laser technology or whatever technology they had, you know, why would they necessarily leave, and, you know, tools or shards of pottery, you know, the cuneiform tablets are, you know, a great, you know, accounting of these stories. So again, you know, scientists were able to find shop receipt and complaint letters against certain Martians, you know. So again, for me, this doesn't hold the you know, it's not a strong argument. The whole article, basically, you can continue if you want, but basically it's just thin air. You know, you're looking for debunking, but basically you're not uh, you're not having a counter argument compared to, you know, documented, dozens and hundreds of documented books, again, about these stories with, you know, facts and proofs and serious studies, you know.
you
So
know, one thing I do when I'm looking at stuff, like I think it's good to bring up something like that, like um, that they're always going to have these articles to debunk, or it's almost like at school, you know, in junior high, when one kid's like, oh, you know, talking bad about another kid to try to make themselves look better. But like, look at this is just an article with a few points, kind of like straw man arguments. They're picking out a few things and picking on them. But when you actually get like one of Graham Hancock's books, it's a really intense experience. I just listened to one of his books, and like Zachariah Sitchin, for instance, he goes in incredible detail in his books. There's like not all of them; some of them aren't so detailed, but a lot of them, there's like pictures. There's multiple examples. The pages aren't just words. There's like words, 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 and then a bunch of examples from different. You know, he pulls from different things. He'll pull from religious texts. He'll pull from somewhere he'd actually been. You know, where he you know, when you take I forget what you call, where you get the pencil and you take an actual picture from the rock, you know, a scratching or whatever you call it. So like
Yeah,
really well researched material. And so, you know, you have to ask yourself when you're looking at these things, like how much energy did this person put into this article versus how much energy did this guy put into writing this book and going to Egypt or going to these places in South America and learning how to read another language. You know, like you really have to weigh where the information's coming from and how much energy somebody put into putting it out. And what I find that's really interesting in a lot of this Egyptology stuff, or the megalithic structures, is the people that talk about this stuff. They're going up against incredible resistance. They're going up against people who are trying to debunk them and make them sound stupid, and they're trying to fight this whole mainstream narrative that's been going on for a really long time. So
that's right. We have a really good comment from Brother Will, who really nails it. The topic of human origins is extremely occulted because if people don't know where they came from, they don't know the direction they are going.
right,
And it's
right,
all about exactly knowledge of the self. And part of Mark talks these days about shadow work, and shadow work is all about answering all these questions: who am I, where do I come from, where do I go? And if you stop at where do I, for example, if you ask a question, where do I come from, or does our species come from, and you stop at the stories of the Bible, then you're not gonna have you're not gonna do an effective shadow work, because you're not gonna go to the root of the story. And so you're gonna have a false image of yourself, a false image of the whole species, if you don't want to look at these stories. Again, we're not saying that it's all truth, but it's a very, very crucial topic to dig if you really want to make sense of what's going on and who you are, and what are our goals on this planet. Really, if you don't know where did it start.
yeah. To me, the big tie-in is the freedom problem, right? Like, okay, this is why I think it's important to get back to why we're in the state we're in. When we look at the cause of things, sometimes we can understand the effects. What we're experiencing now in the world, most of the things people are talking about on shows and podcasts, and is what's happening right now. These are the effects. You know, I always, the way my brain goes is like, why is it like this? Why are people falling for these silly things? Why are they listening to these politicians? There's a few idiots in suits, and there's thousands of people, regular people, who are getting ripped off by these, few little pricks in suits. Why are they putting up with it? Why don't we just run them over and take all our money back? Well, it's because all through history, there's been this theme of going on of this power differential. And that's what's described in the picture of the pyramid that we see on the dollar bill with the eye at top, because the very few have the occulted information of history and how we got into the situation we're in. And to me, that's why this story, that the interference theory, really comes in, because to me it really explains a factor that I have a hard time understanding, and that is when I meet most people, and I've traveled around a good bit. I've driven across the country. I've lived in quite a few different states, and most people are really decent that want to be good people. It's like the majority of people I run into seem like pretty kind, nice, decent people, and yet most people are also willing to just do whatever authority tells them. And it's like, why is that? Well, if we were created as a slave species, that would explain a lot. If there was some interference that came from the outside, be it interdimensional beings, time travelers, or the way Zachariah Sitchin describes it, people from another planet, the Nephilim, came and actually messed around with whatever ape type creatures were on this planet, messed with their genetics and mixed it with their own to create something that could do work for them. That's basically the way the story goes, to get their gold. Then that really explains a lot about why they would try to build into us systems that destroy us, like government. They would have wanted us to be easily controlled, and that would have been the training from the very beginning. And that would explain why we're still having trouble seeing and understanding the slavery that we're experiencing, being controlled.
That's right. That's right. And you mentioned intentions, but people who want to be good people, but if you if you don't have the knowledge of true right and wrong, then you're not gonna be a good person, despite all your intentions. And that means, if you, for example, condone slavery by, voting here in the province of Quebec, there's going to be election this fall, and we see that a lot of people talk about elections. We're going to throw this dictator out, and we're going to put someone else. I really want to go to vote. I really want to change in this province, so I'm going to go to vote. And then right there you're off the track, because by voting you're just condoning slavery. You want someone else to decide for you, what's good and wrong. That's moral relativism, and that's really the root cause of all evil, moral relativism. And that's why we're trying to teach the opposite, which is objective morality, objective right and wrong. So that's how you're, by knowing, objective right and wrong, and by applying it in your actions, then you're going to be truly a good person, not just because you want to be a good person, but because you know what it is, and you are acting upon that knowledge.
So it's kind of like, in a way, it's a very pivotal time in history right now. The way I think about it, one thing that's occurred to me is that we have this vast ability to look at all this information that's never existed in all the history that we know of. However, what's really interesting when you look back at some of these stories, like from the way Sitchin put things together, or even in the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? Like, it's talking about people that had some crazy technology, like they had computers and spaceships, and they were able to calculate the size of the Earth and things like that. So, what's really interesting is, if you think about the way your average mainstream person might come out of school thinking that, oh, we evolved from apes, right? That's the story they give you. And then they also kind of give you this feeling that, oh, we're progressing as a race, we're getting better, we treat children better than we used to in history, and now look at all this technology that we have. But what's really interesting is, when you look at these stories, that there's actually been a regression, and some of it's, the proof of that is told in some of these pictures and some of these ancient structures that we found, that show that there were peaks, heights that humankind reached in times in history, with technology and knowledge of various things that we still don't even seem to have now. So how the heck could we have gone backwards and forwards like that? It's a really strange question and mystery that I think should be intriguing to other people. And that's kind of why I thought it'd be fun to kind of look at some more of this ancient history stuff, because it does connect into why we're here now and why we're in that spot, and why people don't understand, like you're saying, um, objective morality.
That's right. Of course, there's a lot of ways that they're trying to explain, the fall of these civilizations and all the knowledge that they had. Um, yeah, here's the slide from Zakaria Sitchin. I can read. It's very interesting, but you can see that Zakaria Sitchin, his work has been debunked so many times. Of course, because people would look at his work only from a left brain imbalance, a rigid skepticism, without using their intuition, their heart, to really put that story into perspective. So the slide says The biblical tale of man's creation is, of course, the crux of the debate, at times bitter, between creationists and evolutionists, and of the ongoing confrontation between them, at times in courts, always on school boards. As previously stated, both sides had better read the Bible again and in its Hebrew original. So again, people fighting the creationists, the evolutionists, social Darwinists. Um, but again, these people are still in a brain imbalance, so that's why they will reject all kind of stories or explanation of the Genesis put forward by Zechariah Sitchin and all his books. Because if you look from rigid skepticism and you're trying to dig for archaeological proof of the Ark of Alliance or the Noah's Ark, you know, you're it's completely stupid to do that and to look for these archaeological or find a Garden of Eden. How stupid is that? But you'll find people who paid millions of dollars, in university research to find a Garden of Eden. Um,
Yeah, like we're gonna take a giant boat, the biggest boat we can imagine, like a cruise ship boat that we made out of wood, right? And then we're gonna go around and collect two of every type of animal and stuff them on that boat, and somehow we're gonna keep them from eating each other, and we're gonna bring enough food to feed them all, and then we're gonna survive a flood that covers the whole earth in this boat. It's like the way they came off in Bible school telling me that story. I was like, what? I mean, come on, you guys really believe that? I mean, how are you going to put all those animals in a boat? Like, well, God did it. It's miracles. And the thing is, it's that I've come to realize about the miracle thing is, let's just say, for instance, you had some technology that someone else didn't have, right? Like, let's say you had a rock. There's stories that I found that I listened to in some of these books about somebody could put this rock in their mouth and it would make them float up off the earth like you're flying, right? And so other people don't know that you have this magic rock and you can just go fly around whenever you want. Well, if you had that ability, you could convince people all kinds of things, that you're some kind of God, that you have powers that they don't, and therefore they should follow you and do what you say. And a lot of people would, because they'd be so amazed by this miracle that you've created. And that's the problem with religions and stories. If people can create a miracle, if they can create something unbelievable and make it show that they're doing it or they're in the power of it or they have it and you don't, then they could get you to do just about anything. And that's hella dangerous, and then so that's what we want to avoid, is letting ourselves be so how do you call it, when we fall for a trick, when we allow ourselves to be convinced, oh, that's a miracle. So we need to take these stories and weigh them, like I said, but you can also look at the evidence, and that's kind of where I wanted to go with bringing in some more of these slides. Is there is a lot of good evidence. One of them is Stonehenge. That's like one of the most commonly seen, but when you really look into it, it goes pretty deep. There's a lot involved with Stonehenge. It's like a clock, a calendar that has been able to predict eclipses consistently. And there's no one. I think they finally have found supposedly where these stones come from, but it's like really far away. No one has any clue how you would get stones that big and move them that far, especially people at that time in history when this was supposedly put together. It's just one small example, but everybody knows about Stonehenge, and we just sort of blow it off. But this is a really big deal, right?
that's right. That's right. All these, megalithic or monolithic structures that science cannot really explain. They just uh, brush it, brush it off, under the carpet, I guess. We're just gonna put that as mysteries, and that's it. Instead of finding the true reason, but back to your school teachings. What if the teacher would have told you, well, instead of building a wooden ark, it was a flying spaceship, and these people had knowledge of DNA, so they put just a tiny microscopic sample of DNAs that would fit like in the palm of your hand, like, and that was the whole DNA of all this, species of all the plants on Earth right on his hand, and it just left on his spaceship while the flood was going, and there was this huge cataclysm on Earth, and then they came back when the water when you know uh, came to a decent level. Um, what if they would have told you that story in school? It would have been completely different. Oh yeah, so alien that did that. That's why also that the governments they don't want the alien. They always classify all this stuff about aliens. They don't want people to look for aliens. They don't want people to um, study or believe or whatever. Like also I have a slide from Travis Walton, which is very crucial. The the famous quote that he mentioned, that people they want to what again is the
Did you put that in one of those slides?
yeah.
Let me see if I can find it real quick here. See, we can see some
There
of
we
the
go.
other.
You
Did I go
passed
by
it.
it?
You passed it. Yeah.
There it is.
So
Yeah.
again, also, Travis Walton. I didn't know his story. I discovered while watching the Cosmic Abandonment presentation by Mark, and read his books, and the famous quote is that I've come to realize that the biggest problem anywhere in the world is that people's perceptions of reality are compulsively filtered through the screening mesh of what they want and do not want to be true. And that's so true and important. He was an abductee. He's been abducted by aliens, and he would swear, and I think he passed also through detectors multiple times, and he could swear that what he said was not his imagination or hallucinations. And he spent all his life trying to to interest people in that the subject of UFOs, and this is real stuff. But people, he was always like uh, debunked or fought against by people who didn't want that to be true. It's not a question of is it true or not. Is that people don't want it to be true. That's different, because they don't want to assume the responsibility that comes with that knowledge, and that's true for all kind of knowledge and all kind of truth. All these deep truth, these conspiracies. We've titled our chat the conspiracies of all conspiracies. I guess it's because people are afraid to talk about these things, because they will be attacked. They will A lot of people have strong reactions when you talk about UFOs, and they already can lose your credibility. But personally, I don't give a flying fuck about what people think of me, because I'm the one you know I'm the one who owns my body and do whatever the hell I want with it. So if they don't want it to be true, or if they don't want what we're discussing to be true, then they will be stuck. They will be stuck in their own fake belief system, because they don't want to go further in their research. They don't want to open their mind to stuff that could be hurtful, that could mean that they would need to assume responsibility of, you know, from themselves instead of just relying on the government who hides all this stuff from them.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much weird UFO information out there and stories that I got to admit it baffles me a little bit of where to land on those things. But I'm not one to discount things that I can't disprove. I don't see the point of that. If somebody brings up a theory and it seems far out to me, that's not a reason to not believe it. You know, um, but I'm not going to say I necessarily believe it either. I'm going to
You
say,
don't want
oh,
to be a
that's an
blind
interesting
believer,
piece
of
of
course.
information, and I'm going to see how I can tie that in. What does his quote say? I've come to realize that the biggest problem anywhere in the world is that people's perceptions of reality are compulsively filtered through the screening of what they want and do not want to be true. Did you already read it?
Yeah, I did, but
Oh,
now
can't
it's
hurt to read it again. Now we doubled
yeah,
up.
that's right. Because that no, but that's crucial information, and that explains a lot of what we see right now. People who don't want to assume, that they don't want to look further. They get injected with stuff that they don't know. They don't care as long as they're being told to do so. It's because they don't want to assume the responsibility that the government and these big pharma might want to hurt them. So if they don't want that, then they filter to the screening mesh of unicorns and rainbows that the government is there to provide for their health, and they would inject whatever they want and in their body without any kind of research whatsoever.
All
And
right. I
it's
don't
all
remember.
around. It's all
I,
around me. It's all
I
around
don't.
us.
Oh, I mean, it's almost like I find myself trying to change the subject sometimes of how bad things are out there. But that's why we're here. That's why we're trying to do this to pique people's interest. I feel like maybe more now than in other times where the tyranny's becoming pretty obvious. It's becoming more obvious by the day, especially where you lived on. And, like maybe people are more in that questioning mood that you should be. And that's kind of why I bring up these pictures, because it's the same kind of questions that, I've been asking my whole life. Like when you see a picture like this with these giant stones put together, any one of these stones weighs so much. We would have a hard time doing it with modern equipment. And yet they're fit together in a jigsaw puzzle pattern and in such a way that you can't even put a piece of paper between them.
That's
So just knowing that things like this exist on the earth should put a person in sort of a questioning state of mind. Like, that is kind of weird. That doesn't make sense, right? And
that's right. And they're
that does
saying
apply
that
to today, but I know it seems like a stretch, but it does.
yeah, absolutely. And they were saying that they cut that with copper tools, copper, which is really really soft at the time. But that's the thing with these structures. Also, it's really hard to date, and that's where the science often play because you cannot use much of carbon dating, like they can do for mummies or stuff with um, clothes clothing or whatever has carbon in it. So it's really hard to carbon date these structures, and that's where they play. But with the time they were built and the technology that were available at this time, but looking at this is clearly laser cut precisions. Only lasers could at this time, at this period of time in history, explain that. So only lasers. But again, they will try to far stretch, with copper tools and stuff that these were made. But yeah, you cannot even put a paper between that. So that's really amazing stuff.
There is that theory that he was talking about in, was it Fingerprints of the Gods, that some people have a theory that there was this liquid that you could pour on a rock and it would melt it. And that's one possible theory. There's theories about giants that there's a lot of interesting stuff. We could go on a whole nother show about all the theories about giants. There's theories of monks that have been able to use certain vibrations through sound to lift heavy objects or lift themselves. So there's all these different possible explanations, but all of them seem kind of far out compared to the reality that we know of how we do things, how we put things together. And coming from someone like myself who's, been a carpenter, and I know how things are put together, when I look at something like this, it really begs the question of what haven't we been told about history, and so many other things where it's like just an extreme contrast to the reality we live in, that, or the story we've been told, that things have happened chronologically, where like I said, okay, let's go back to Samaria, right? Like in Sitchin's work and a lot of other work, they go back to Sumerians is supposed to be one of the oldest culture, right? Isn't that what you've come to realize, Dom, through your studies?
Well, according to Zechariah Sitchin, the Sumerian, culture would have dated back to 400,000 years, between 400,000 and 200,000 years. Um, of course, there's hardly evidence of that, because if you believe in the flood story, also of the Bible, that would have washed most of the stuff on earth. Um, and also that these beings would have voluntarily erased any kind of most of their print on this planet. But yeah, the how the how the hell do you explain that all these these are the cylinders, Sumerian cylinders, copper cylinders, I think. Again, with this flying saucer, how imagine you are someone living in Sumeria like 4,000 years before BC. How much of an imagination you would need to have to draw a flying saucer like this one, or the other thing behind the fish like uh, king or fish like god, you know, which really looks like DNA or some sort of weird machine that could not even imagine like 6,000 years ago. Same thing with all the other pictures, all these weird uh, bird-like people and surrounded by these weird machines with snakes or stuff that you cannot even imagine today that would exist, that seem to have been you know carved on these cylinders. That's simply amazing. And if you just say, oh no, it's a tree, or it's very hard to, I think, debunk these images, but still people will try to do it to avoid their responsibility, and will tell you a blissful lie instead.
Well, they had some pretty deep understanding way back in ancient Sumeria of the location of they understood astronomy pretty well, which was amazing. Okay, they had textiles, so they had metallurgy, and all these things have been discovered. They're not argued that these things are true. So this is the most ancient culture we know about that popped out. Before that, what did we have? Just cavemen, and then all of a sudden we got these Sumerians that have metallurgy, that have complex knowledge of astronomy, that have metallurgy, that have like this tree of life, and this understanding of what seems to be maybe even DNA or cloning technology. And that's the part that really, to me, made sense, because you look at where we're getting now in terms of technology, and they're using stem cells, and they're working on cloning the pigs. And I'm sure there's been humans that have been cloned. So you look back in history, and it seems like this same technology that's what these stories allude to, that they had similar technology, if not even better, way back then. And the way Sitchin translates those tablets found in, I think a lot of the tablets were found in Nineveh, if I'm not mistaken, to show that Enki, which was one of the gods who came from this other planet, and the way he interprets the story, was experimenting with creating a slave race, and he was mixing different things together. And even that, it explains so much to me that's weird about history, where you have stories of things that don't make sense that we don't have in modern times, like different animals mixed together, like in mythology. And it all makes a lot more sense when you think about it from this lens of perhaps someone did have that technology and they were playing with DNA of animals and humans and mixing things together. That would explain a lot of things that don't make sense about
Uh,
mythology, right?
and when you think about it, DNAs, we didn't know much about DNAs even in the 70s and early 80s. It's only really when in the 90s that we really started to discover more about DNA and use it in court trials and stuff. But before that, there was not much knowledge about DNA, and even in the scientific community. So how come they would have known like 6,000 years ago, and then boom, blank, 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 and then 1990, 6,000 years later, we discover it again. So again, it means that there was an ancient knowledge that we are beginning to discover, beginning to really, we don't, I don't think that we even master the DNA and all these cloning technology like these people were doing like maybe 400,000 years ago. So they were way more advanced than us, way before us. So, but again, it's not a question of who's more advanced or not. I think that the most important question is, do do you know right and wrong? And
The
you
only
know,
point, it's like the only point of all this stuff is is the question, right? Like, because even right there, like, we're not going to say that's the true story. It's an interesting story, and for me it was really valuable because it debunked. I mean, talk about debunking. The positive side of debunking is when you're caught up in sort of belief systems or religious systems, because I had studied all the biblical stories when I studied this work, whether it was Lloyd Pye or um, Graham Hancock or whoever it was that I was reading their book and looking through their information, it would put a big question mark on the story I was told in school, that the chronology of the way things went in history. It would put a big question mark on what I was taught in church. And so to me, that's the only point of all this for listeners is if you ask these questions and you go down these routes of research, you kind of have to do it on your own. We can show you some pictures and talk about it, but ultimately you got to get curious, right? And if you're curious, what's going to happen if you're brave is your belief systems are going to get broken down, and you're going to realize that all these stories are just stories, and you have to decipher which ones are important or why to you. Does that make sense?
absolutely, absolutely. And the thing is, you know, people they want to keep us enslaved. If we've been enslaved for thousands of years, there are people on earth that want to keep this power differential, this knowledge differential. That's why they work so hard to cover these things. They paid universities to do research to come to conclusions, that this gigantic stone that 400 tons was just moved like there or by by a few thousand people with cords and ropes and you know rolled on wood. Um, So, anyways, it's just what it's okay to debunk, but again, it's just that when you look at some of the debunking stories or debunking arguments, it doesn't. It's really thin air, you know. It doesn't hold the line. So it's really important to look for yourself at these things, and yeah, because finding about the human origin is finding about yourself. You know, finding that we've been, you know, abandoned by our creators, um, and that's why we have so much self-loathing at the spiritual, at the soul level. You know, that's why humanity hates itself so much right now. It's because, you know, it has this cosmic abandonment of the, you know, their uh,
It's
because
like a
the,
negative cycle that's
this
being, repeated, right?
anger at our cosmic parents. Why do you left us here? Why do you left us with so very few knowledge? That, you know, you had all this knowledge, you had all these technology. Why did you left us here? You know, with, you know, with ourselves, and, you know, to trying to figure out who we are, and, you know, passing on a few of that information through occulted brotherhood, or, you know, secret brotherhoods, like like the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, or, you know, there were some tidbits of, you know, I think, of ways that these people were trying to give us part of clues of how to get to a proper knowledge of ourselves, but vary by tiny bit, tiny by tiny bit. And same thing with all the messiahs, the, you know, Abraham, or whatever, Moses or Jesus or whatever. These people, I think that they had connection with these ancient beings. That's my personal feeling. Whether it's for by genetics, by being descendants of these beings, or, you know, by having a connection with them. So they had, so for me, that would explain a lot also if Jesus would have been like, for example, you know, the fruit of the insemination of a certain being with Virgin Mary, for example, who would have been inseminated artificially by these beings. That would explain a lot, you know, why Jesus, we don't have the story of between 17 years old and 30 years old. You know, there's a huge blank there. You know, a lot of people argue that he traveled to India and maybe, you know, studied the Zoroastrian religion and stuff, and came back then to Jerusalem. There was just a lot of, but that would explain a lot of the miracles. You know, if he had, you know, a direct or a very uh, uh, um, genetic that comes directly from these beings, that would explain a lot of, you know, the so-called miracles, which actually be uh, readily explainable by just being a crossover between, you know, aliens who had that kind of technology and human beings. So they would have put that guy on Earth to send us a message, the truth of anarchy. Um, but again, this message would have been perverted by people with evil, you know, intentions, called themselves bishops and popes and Constantine and Council of Nicaea. So that would explain a lot of things. That would explain a lot of things way more than they are trying to explain us with the so-called, you know, stories of the creation, Adam and Eve,
I
and
think of it too, like the politicians, they don't want to ever let a good story go to waste, right? Like if something happens, they're always trying to ride that wave of excitement with, and then lead people in a certain direction, right? That's kind of how it works with the Hegelian dialectic, trying to get people opposing each other and then, lead them the direction you want with the solution. Well, I've thought about it all through history. You look at whoever's in power, they probably have the money and the resources to send people out, their soldiers and their emissaries or whatever, to gather information and gather artifacts, right? And so if you got enough money and power, you can get together a lot of information and knowledge that most people don't have, right? And then you can start to build a story from that. Say you have, like I said, some rock that glows, or the story that that's hidden in your chambers, that tells the story of human history, right? Well, now you want to spin that story in such a way that works out well for you. And it's like so many times, like when you look at these giant structures or the pyramids or the temples, like they'll say, "Oh, that's such and such ruler." But we know that any ruler that came along in history that found a temple like that's going to be like, "Oh yeah, this is mine. Yeah, I built this." You know?
That's right.
Of course,
That's right.
right? That's just the way evil works. It tries to control and take power over people and manipulate them. But the power that we have is to look deeper and ask the bigger questions and try to understand, to see through the parts that don't make sense, and that's why I was like showing that picture of the big giant rock, because it's like, yeah, that this is Baalbek, I think, Lebanon, and it was like one of the stones they didn't use, right? So it just shows how huge, how giant this is. We could probably put cranes all around this thing, and we wouldn't be able to move it because we wouldn't be able to organize all the cranes to move at once. Like how the hell did they do that? Who was doing that? Who had the technology to do that? We have to have some bravery to ask those questions, and to seek the answer. But we might not ever know the exact answer on that one. But that's obviously not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is it asks a very good question. Why didn't they tell me about that in school? Why don't they have an explanation for it? If they, are supposed keepers of knowledge, know the answers, and why aren't they giving them to us? Why are we in the
That's
dark?
right.
Why don't we have a good explanation? Well, you and I think through our own studies have found some explanations that kind of make more sense than anything else we've heard, right? When you put together the different books we've read and different podcasts we listen to, we start to get a little more well-rounded possibility of what could be, I think.
Absolutely, to keep us, under control, to keep us under slavery. That's the main reason, to keep them in power from generations to generations. That's the main reason, and that's the main reason also I'm here to talk about these studies and these the stuff that resonates with me with the truth, is because it's the only way to end slavery is to really go and look for this knowledge, which gives a lot of answers, can give a lot of answers that you will not find anywhere else in modern science or in religion and all these, left brain imbalance religions, actually. Well, the traditional religions or, modern religions like scientism.
Well, we've been chatting on this for about an hour. We had a bunch more slides we were going to go through, but it's like I think both of us have the tendency to like want to keep bringing it back to the more important topic of natural law and what we're doing in a day-to-day um, basis, and why people are not getting it. But yeah, thanks for going through these ones with me, Dom, and putting together those slides. Maybe we can, if you got time, we could keep going on it next week. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
that'd be
Anytime,
cool.
brother.
Yeah, I'd
Anytime,
like to keep
brother.
going through this topic more because there's a lot of little details and stuff that I'd like to share with people. Maybe someone's winds up watching this and they get kind of curious and they're like, "What are they talking about?" Why are they so skeptical of mainstream? And maybe they start looking into one of these things that we bring up, one of these pictures, and like, what was that picture they were showing about Lebanon or whatever? And
That's
maybe
right.
that
And
leads them down the path that I went down when I was young and curious. And I often think of myself when I was like 25 years old or something. like I spent from that age all the way until like my late 30s before I started coming back to understanding the things that I think really matter in my 40s now, you know. I wish I could help someone else skip those 20 wasted years of thinking a bunch of useless thoughts, you know,
That's
and kind of lead
exactly
them a little more directly to, you know, if I could meet my younger self, I would try to share this information. Like, hey, here's a good place to get started. Look at ancient history. Ask yourself, why are humans the way they are? What's wrong with the story they told us in school? What are the holes in the story that have not been answered? Let's look at that, you know. That's what I guess that's what I would kind of sum it up with for
That's right.
today.
So many stuff to dig in. Also, the chromosome number two fuse at the telomeres. There's a lot of things that we can discuss, and that we can bring people to look at that would also, lead them to find, truth. And it's part of a proper shadow work to discover the human origin. So it's crucial that we bring people, into looking more into this stuff. And it's really fun, and it's really cool to have the courage to just speak about these things, because most people, they don't even want to talk about this because they know that they're gonna be attacked by, weak and sensitive mind. But we don't really care about that. We only serve truth. So anytime, brother, next week, anytime, you just send me a message and I'm here, man.
Thanks, Tom. All right, my man. You have a good night, and then we'll get back to the subject and keep going with it next time.
Take care, brother.
All right, man. Have a good night. Let's see if I can get my slide back on here. Okay. Thanks for coming, folks. Check out endevil.life. Vertu consequence. Okay, there's me.